Hey guys, welcome to the All Blue podcast. I am here with Yonas Abraham, our North American representative, as well as Hrvoje, our
Yo,
European and Croatian representative. And of course, I'm here again, somehow stumbled into this group. But today we're going to be talking about the new PRB cards. PRB is a set, at least in PRB01, did not get any new cards, only reprints of old cards. But in this set, we are finally getting some new cards. Similar to the 6 start decks that we got, we are only getting a couple per color, but still these 3 colors these 3 cards per color aim to buff up some of the older decks. So we're going to be talking about how we think about these cards, what decks they might slot into, and in general, what we think the meta may start to look like after we get OP12 with the starters with PRB. It's going to be really complicated, really name this meta that we're going to be in, but how are you guys feeling today?
I'm doing great. Still doing a lot of OP12 testing, but even though PRB is a couple months away, I'm still excited for a lot of these new cards.
I'm doing fine as well. The weather has been really shaky in Croatia lately, so I got caught in like super rainy weather all of a sudden. But it's just water. I survived, so I'm here. It's not super warm anymore. Now it's like you can actually breathe outside because it's comfortable temperatures.
It's not true for Japan. It's really, really hot in Japan right now. How should we go about this? I imagine that it would be the most clean to just go through these in color order.
Yeah, let's
I
do
agree.
color. And I think it makes the most sense just to get the most fun color for Hawaii out of the way by just doing yellow. I imagine yellow is the color that you're most interested in.
I mean, there's only one card I'm interested in there. I mean, if
That
we
is
only count the new ones, there is also the old Utama, but
Yeah, let's just go over the most important card, I guess, because I think it's the most interesting, which is the new 5-cost ace. In PRB, there's a 5-cost yellow ace that's 7k power. It's a Whitebeard pirate. On play, if you have a face-up life, play up to 1 2-cost Sabo, ace, or Luffy from your treasure hand and put it into play. Um, we kind of have this new mini Moria now in yellow for BY Luffy. How exciting is this card? Is this enough to bring like BY back to the map in your perspective, Away?
well, that's difficult to say without testing like the OP12 format for sure. But I think it has insane potential. Like it doesn't solve. This is like an endgame card, but unlike Moria, it's not flexible in that you can Moria on like 3 face down life and still get value out of it. You still need to actually awaken and get the setup to utilize this effect. But the fact that it doesn't bring out the baby rested and that you just need to have any face up life, I think it's really really powerful, and it might actually make BY meta just because of how absurdly efficient now having a 2-cost ace is, because you effectively have one card go to 9k, an extra 7k body, so it's almost Moria level. It's just less flexible and impossible to use in early game in any way because it doesn't have a counter. I think BY, like, he's closing in on actual meta contender spots. I'm not sure how much more he needs, but this is a really big step in the right direction. So I will have some copium and say, yeah, this makes him meta for sure, like tier 2.
When they showed this card, I misread it at first, and I thought it only came out of your hand, and I was complaining like, "Dude, BY needs something to play cards out of trash, not hand." But then I realized that it just does that. So this, I was a bit of a BY player, but obviously not to the level that Hrvoje was. But I think that at the very least, UI is a very complicated deck, but there's the sort of a generic game plan of getting to 8 cost Moria and then just doing 8 cost Moria, go to 9k, stay at 0 life, and just like wall up for the rest of the game for as many cards as you have in your hand was like the sort of standard way to play the deck. That not being possible, and this card letting you basically leave up an extra like 6 dong. If you're, how you use the rest of your dong is going to make the complexity of the deck maybe a little bit higher. Also, the deck building maybe a bit more complicated. So very excited to see how this card's going to shape up. I know that it's a deck that might be a bit more a bit too complicated for me now, though.
I'm also very excited about this card. I think this definitely solves one of the main gaps that the Moria, like being banned, kind of gave the problem with BY, which is like the resource problem. Like the deck ran out of cards way too quickly to become a 9k leader, and at least this kind of generates a little bit of extra value. One of my concerns, at least initially, is just the fact that you don't really have any characters aside from like the fist Luffy that's an 8k and this and everything else is kind of smaller. You don't really have any protection against like power based removal effects, which is kind of awkward. And then additionally, you don't really have any really big beater that can dodge cards like Gravity Blade. So I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be a Gravity Blade format in OP13 and PRB02, but that's at least one of my initial concerns. But I'm also just more excited for this card in other builds, like Red Yellow Sabo or like Blue Yellow Ace. But I like those leaders more so because I think they're fun to mess around with, whereas like BY is a little bit more tried and tested.
Yeah, those are pretty much like all good. The concerns I think are very valid, and individually you can solve all of them. Like you can have a big body in like 7-cost law because he does have, you can run targets supernova yellow cards in this deck, and the whole like feel of the deck switches a lot without the Moria, where you just have to be more aggressive, and this lets you like prolong that aggression. But the point is you're still trying to close the game fast, so it's like difficult to beat stuff like Bonnie and just get good value out of your cards because, as you said, your biggest body is the Punch Luffy. I think the main problem is like, including me as well, like people don't have nearly as much time in optimizing the BY deck after the Moria hit. Like we saw it win some locals and smaller tournaments in, I assume both Europe and NA at this point. It even had like a top 32 or top 16 in NA very recently. So deck already has some potential there, but nobody's really working on it to optimize it. But the fact is, it can go like super aggro with already its current shell, because you can just like Kuzan swing, Zeus blow up whatever, their 6-cost, 7-cost, and just abuse that early tempo advantage in a similar way that like Bello Betty would, but you know, a bit less swarmy, but your bodies are much bigger and easier to stick around in those early turns where you apply pressure, assuming you can start playing and actually awaken. So yeah, the deck, huge potential, but the harsh truth is like nobody has really did proper testing on it yet. So it'll probably be East that does it when PRB2 releases.
The East isn't really known for cooking up new decks, so people may just kind of ignore it until the West gets it, and then suddenly the West's going to be like, wait, how'd you miss this? But I mean, Jonas did kind of briefly talk
Sakazuki.
about. Yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, we did find Sakazuki. That is our one thing. BY Luffy during the Doflamingo meta, no one in Japan. Or I mean, it was maybe like the second or third most played deck, but it was nowhere near as popular as it was in the West. So, um,
Hmm.
so speaking of red, yellow, Sabo, blue, yellow, ace, I am a big blue, yellow, ace fan just because the deck's really interesting. And we've been getting randomly a lot of 5-cost aces, which is kind of core to the BY ace deck. Over a long period of time. We also have, I'm not sure if you guys remember, in EB02, there's an ace that was a 5-cost 5,000 that searches the top 5 for a 2-cost character. Doesn't have to be Ace, Sabo, or Luffy, and then plays one 2-cost character rested out of your hand, which is in a way very similar to this 5-cost ace and just gives you kind of more targets, more ways to cheat out these smaller characters onto the board. And I think especially for BI Ace, just getting a card like this increases the consistency, increases the number of resources that you have. I think for that deck especially, it's going to be a very good buff.
Now I gotta spend some time cooking, Kai.
Yeah, no, the card is really good for red, yellow, Sabo, and blue, yellow ace. Like, I completely see my mind because BY is like priority number 1, but this is technically like better support for those two decks than it is for BY. It's just that BY is like, you know, already at this power level, and these two are like catching up, so they might go here, but BY gets smaller push, but it still ends up higher, I feel. But the card is so good for the other brother leaders as well with ace, because you easily get the face up life, and then you get to pick the kid you actually bring out of life. And yeah, Sabo just gets to like put back the Luffy after he swings, revive the kid plays Luffy.
Speaking of Blue Yellow Ace, we briefly already talked about the Otama in a previous episode, but I do want to bring it up briefly just so we go over all the PRB cards. The Yellow Otama is a 2-cost rare from PRB. It's a 0-power Wano card with 2k counter. It's activate main, you can rest this character and add one card from the top and bottom of your life to your hand, and then buff one of your leaders or characters by 3k during this turn. It also has a trigger that rests a 4-cost. I mentioned before that this card also might be a very good tool for Blue Yellow Ace. And especially with the EBO2 ace that can cheat in 2-cost characters, this might end up being like something that ends up being a little bit more cohesive plan. But I have to mess around with it a lot more. Have your thoughts? Have you, Kai in particular, has your thoughts changed about this card at all? Do you think this card's still like pretty reasonable in blue yellow, or do you think it might have other homes?
I've been trying to figure out what other decks you may want to use this in. I don't necessarily think that it would be excellent in a deck like NL because you have other things that you would rather do instead of increase your leader's power. So it would just be, blue yellow ace that can retrieve the card if you can't find a way to use it from your leader effect. Also, blue yellow Nami just has this Wano package as well that it works well around. I think all in all, like in general, it's just a solid card. Fits into a lot of decks generically just because it is a 2K. But I can't really find a standout deck that like completely changes the game for.
I don't remember if we addressed previously, was like, if Blackbeard is ever really popular in the meta, this is like one of the few of those take life cards which you can activate without like worry about him disabling one plays because it's activate main. Other than that, yeah, we'll see. It's very dependent on the meta.
These sorts of effects just work the best within decks that also have access to blue, just because you can bounce back the Ultama back to your hand, for example. Definitely something to look at for those, because increasing your hand by 1 through your life, you're still card neutral because you had to play the Ultama. So if you can find decks that can utilize the plus 3000 well, utilize the card drawn from your life, and also find a way to bring back the stomach tent, then you have a really strong deck. And Blue Yellow Nami at least is the one that comes to mind for that.
I need to print a blue yellow 7 warlord leader just so I can play forecast law and cards like this, but that's just more copium.
Mildly broken.
Forecast law is just broken, but we won't talk about it too much.
Okay, probably
so-
not in this meta, but yeah.
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 Beautiful altered, yeah.
Let's talk about the last yellow card that's new to PRB, and that's the Boa. The only yellow SR, I believe. It's a 5-cost 7k power with like the weirdest typings. It's
Tags,
Film,
yeah.
7 Warlords, and Kuja Pirate. The on play says you can discard 1 card with a trigger from your hand. Your opponent's rested leader or a character other than Monkey D. Luffy cannot attack until your opponent's next end of turn. Or opponent's next turn. And then the trigger says KO of 4 costs. When I first saw this card, I was like, this card just doesn't really have a home. The flexibility of this card is quite strong. Like stopping rested leaders, kind of like the 4 costs Arlong, or just stopping like any character is like a huge amount of flexibility. I just don't really know what yellow deck will want a card like this. So I'm just curious if you guys think this card is going to have an initial home. Do you think this card's power levels up to snuff? What are your thoughts on this card, Hrvoje?
Mostly knee-jerk reactions where I think the card is not looking that good, just because of the like in my mind there's always the comparison to the 6-cost Boa from OP7 or wherever she came out, who just like for free does the same thing, can bottom a 1 cost. It has the same restriction even, doesn't have the trigger, but it's like the same idea. You have this vanilla stated unit without a counter that you put in your deck, and then the problem is this one trashes a card from hand, and not just any card, but a very specific card type from your hand. So you go -1 for potentially a... I guess the biggest upside is preventing a leader when attacking. So in a meta where those are present, maybe this would be like really good into Doffy if we had a Doffy heavy meta, because the trigger is also then more relevant to KO 4 costs. But as it stands, I don't know. I cannot think of anything that like screams for this, especially because the typings, like the 7 Warlords and Kuja, synergize with blue color, which once again points towards like blue yellow Nami. But I don't see her needing an effect like that necessarily. Like she already has like tempo tools such as Nojiko and Jozu and Zeus. So yeah, I'm just a very confusing piece of card design to me. You can take it away, Kai.
Yeah, I just don't really know what deck would really want this, as you guys have been really saying. It's also the first yellow film card that we have, so it's not like we have any sort of precedent for what deck Bandai wants us to put it into. Um, Also, the 6-cost Hancock that we've been saying hasn't really been used in decks historically. But this doesn't really necessarily mean that like it can't be used, because we do have things like, Rago versus Red Rock, where like the color that can use it can make a very big difference for the card. I feel like even if other colors had access to it, given that you changed the requirement for the on play effect to not have trigger effects, might be something else, I still don't know if you'd really want to use it. I have this theory about this card that Bandai generally designs the cards a little bit ahead of time, so they have some time to test it or something. And I have a feeling because, for example, we got a lot of anti-red purple law cards the set after he was banned. So sometimes the ban schedule, sometimes the card release, and sometimes what they expect the meta to be ends up being different from what it actually ends up being. And I feel like this card may have been anti-Green Zoro tech, expecting Green Zoro to be by far the strongest deck. But because Green Zoro's kind of been relatively high tier, but not necessarily top tier, this sort of effect that makes the opponent's rested leader not be able to attack really only affects one leader that you don't necessarily see in every single tournament. So a bit of an awkward card. Maybe in the future will find its place, but right now I can't like the thing is even blue yellow Nami, the deck doesn't really run that many trigger cards. So you'd think about a deck like Vegapunk, but Vegapunk has the 5-cost S Snake, which can come out for 1 cost. So just lots of things that are a bit iffy about the card.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Especially like if they expected a bunch of Luffys to dominate the meta, they would probably not print this card because of the restriction like that all the ball cards have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, it can lock a Luffy leader. It's a rested leader or a character that's not Luffy, but it's still locking the Luffy leaders doesn't really do too much when the leader
And
is usually
that's
just
confusing wording, I think.
the art's very nice though.
Do you guys want to work backwards in terms of colors? You can get it to it's black, or is there a color you guys want to go towards?
Black has some really exciting stuff, so I think it's what people want to hear the most about.
Let's go backwards on the color wheel and let's go towards black, which I think probably has on average some of the best cards for PRB. And let's just start with the most important one. Moria is back. We have a new rare in Gecko Moria. Is a 6-cost 7K. It's Thriller Bark's Pirates and 7 Warlords. That says on play, if your leader has the Thriller Bark Pirate type, play up to 1 character with a cost of 4 or less from your trash rested. Then give your leader up to 1 rested Dawn. So they've listened to our woes. They've made Moria leader locked, and it doesn't bring back 2 characters now. But it is cheaper and does get you an extra Dawn. Is this card good enough to make decks like Moria and Perona viable? Or is this just like a decent tool that doesn't really compete compared to what the new cards offer? I'm on the side of I don't think this card is good enough to make either of those decks great, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Kai.
I think that it makes the Moria leader significantly stronger. Whether or not it's enough to contend with the meta is another question. But I think that just being able to pull back any 4-cost, not specifically a Thriller Bark 4-cost, means that on 8 Dong, where previously you would just play something like, at best, I don't know exactly Moria combos, but if you pull back a 4 and a 2-cost, you could, for example, pull back like Tsuda and Absalom KOA 4-cost, for example. Whereas for 8 Dong with this card, because you could bring back 2 4-costs thanks to the Dong on your leader, you can bring back Hina. Granted, it is going to be rested, but Rebecca into Hina, into leader effect, into Absalom, and now you can KO a 6-cost and make a much bigger board. So I think it is a very massive buff for specifically Moria. But the fact that his bodies on the board, after you do that massive play, are 5K in a meta where all of the leaders are 6K, may be a bit tricky to actually translate those boards on those bodies on the board into relevant damage. But it is still very relevant. As for Perona, I have been thinking about it, but I just can't really find anything as significant because you don't necessarily need the extra dong on your leader. Bringing back Dyuma is nice, but like aside from that, it is kind of like budget Moria with 1 less life.
Oh, I have a lot of opinions about this card. Let me just start off with Perona. I don't think there's like any great piece of synergy because it can only attach Dawn to the leader. So if you could attach to characters, maybe it would like enable some relevant breakpoints or like effects which.
Sorry, maybe translation error. Japanese card says that you can attach to characters.
Oh, okay, then Discord lied to me. Okay, then if there's any one attacking effects which actually benefit from the attached Dawn, which there aren't that many in black and green, maybe there is some hope for this card in Perona. But I think the true potential really is in Moria, because Moria has, like, in OP10 we tested the deck a lot, and it kind of fell short by a little bit from being a serious contender. And most of the OP10 meta contenders have translated somewhat well into OP11, so I don't think he's that far off from the top. And I do genuinely think this card could like allow him to get there, because usually the Moria's problem is he can gas out, but before he gasses out, he's applying such immense pressure that like very few decks can actually match between the Perona, the Absalom clears, the the Hogback grind game, and then this creates a lot of flexibility and like a genuine power play on Nadon that I think is better than just playing the 8-cost Moria. Because in the past you would only play 8-cost Moria like in OP6, OP EB1 days, alongside like Ice Age or Great Eruption to get a clear. But as Kai said, you have like the Rebecca Hina, you attach them to leader, swing Absalom, kill a 6-cost. That's already like such a huge value of bodies on the board that you might not even have space for, but you can be flexible, obviously. And even if the Rebecca is rested, they'll probably have to deal with it because Moria naturally like kills weenies with like Brook and Absalom. So I do think this card is like a huge upgrade, and he might actually become a contender in the meta. Like I would not discount him at all. I think this is like a massive power up.
The fact that it attaches up to characters also really helps with the Ryuma. I think they printed in like OP11. I forget, is it 10 or 11? The 4/6.
It's 10. It's either 9 or 10, but that's not the card I think is that.
It's not amazing, but I do think having 6K bodies to pressure with is like I think that Moria doesn't do particularly well. So like having access to that card at the very least might be fun.
That's something, I guess.
He basically power creeps like Sengoku in the decks which are Thriller Bark, because Sengoku was like 7-cost and a blocker, but the blocker aspect was much less impressive, especially because of the Navy lock.
But yeah, I hope some people can do well with Moria. I know someone in like Montreal in over in the NA side ended up getting a top 8 with Moria, even in this format without this card. So maybe with a lot more extra tools, it might end up doing a lot better. Let's talk about the next black card. I think is also quite reasonable. The Sabo, the SR for black in this set. It's a 6-cost, 6K power that's both Dressrosa and Rev Army. It's a 2K counter. And it's a blocker that says if you play this from your hand, if you have 15 or more cards in your trash, it costs 3 less. In my head, I think the decks that can kind of help facilitate this the most are like maybe Blackbeard because it gets cards in trash really quickly, and then Rebecca since Rebecca also puts some cards in trash really fast. I don't think Blackbeard would really want a card like this, just because like they have cheaper blockers and better blockers. But I do think that this card's very, very good for Rebecca if that ends up being a very popular leader. This also might be good in Usopp, but I am also like skeptical if that deck really needs a 6-cost blocker. But I'm curious on what you think about this card, Hrvoje. I think this card has any other homes where this might be exceptional.
I think Uchi is the one you.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
kind
Uchi.
of neglected, and he's probably the most the biggest benefactor of this because he's the one that's guaranteed running the 4-cost Rebecca, and then she can like get this and play it like because he becomes 3-cost in hand once the graveyard is.
I forgot about
full
Rebecca.
enough.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Or Lucci,
Yeah, but it just works with arguably the best blocker in the game. I also think in Moria, it will really depend on Moria builds, but I also think it can quickly slot into Moria, especially as the game has become so much more tempo oriented. Having a blocker like 3/6 that you can drop, we already know how much potential that has because of its popularity in Green Purple Luffy. Like 3/6K blocker is such a safe place to be. I don't think it's like a very revolutionary, pun not intended, but not that like game breaking in a sense, like Sanji maybe was, because Sanji could be cheated out by the RPO leader when he first came out, but it's still like such a good utility piece that yeah, it kind of works for the Dressrosa leaders, but there I think the problem is not in the cards but in the leaders being too slow. But the Dressrosa typing is really good and relevant. Those are like the main candidates in my mind, Lucci and Moria.
Of the Dressrosa leaders, Rebecca maybe doesn't use it as well as Usopp, just because Usopp does kind of play this style of playing your 7-cost Rebecca into just walling up with a bunch of blockers, as the blockers also draw you one when they die most of the time. So it does help Usopp a lot. The main thing that I want to talk about, which Hrvoje kind of stole from me, was the fact that you can play it off of Rebecca because it comes to your hand once. So that combo I think can be very powerful, and both those cards being Dressrosa typing could be relevant to these Dressrosa decks, just making it very easy to search, very easy to fill up your trash. But yeah, this is very much a Lucci card, if anything. I do wonder though, I'm not a huge Lucci player, so I will be kind of asking this openly to you guys. does Lucci have really the spot to put in like a luxury 2000 counter like this? Doesn't really have any effect on the board, just is kind of a card that stalls. Yeah, that's what I would think.
So
I feel like
some of his
most
2Ks are already like they run the Bartolomeo blocker nowadays because in the 10 cost
Mhm.
Kuzan focus build without the dedicated searchers, like those 2Ks that are not Tsuru and some toy soldiers, they can kind of be whatever. And if your whatever is a cheap 6K power blocker, I think that
Mhm.
works better than the Bartolomeo they currently run.
Yeah, at least for Rebecca, like Rebecca didn't even really run Bartolomeo that much, electing to run those things like Toy Soldier instead. Again, Toy Soldier also Dressrosa card though, so lots of very strong Dressrosa cards just not really clicking into place for the Dressrosa leaders. But you'd end up running something like Bartolomeo at 1 just to have a decent panic button to pull back from trash out of the forecast Rebecca effect. And this is, for the most part, just a straight upgrade to that, given that you do need to have 15 cards in your trash to get the actual -3 cost to play it immediately. Not going to change black as a whole for me, though, in the way that Moria is going to change the Moria deck as a whole for me.
It's more
Agreed.
just like a slight improvement, which I think is a good thing for a lot of these black decks, but it's something to write home about.
Well, that is the theme of PRB.
So quote unquote slight improvements. Let's go over the last black card we talked about last time, which was the 4-cost Shiryu. Just one more time, it's a 4-cost 5K Blackbeard Pirate with 1K counter. If your leaders has Blackbeard Pirates type, this character gains blocker and has +4 cost. And then on KO, if your leader is Blackbeard Pirate type, KO one of your opponent's characters with a base cost of 4 or less. We've talked briefly about how taxed the 4-cost slot is with like OP10 Shiryu, San Juan Wolf, Burgess, now this card. Do you think this card is still going to be a very powerful tool in small quantities in this deck? Or do you think this will kind of lead or be a very powerful tool in making sure that Blackbeard becomes the ultimate KO deck, which it kind of slowly seems like it's transitioning to become in OP11 and 12.
There are a couple of things going for this card. I think the main thing that's I always tend to overlook when I'm evaluating card is the slot that it fits into. And you guys mentioned last time that there are already some very key forecast slots in the deck that the Blackbeard deck is already running. But this Shiryu card being an anti-aggro card, which is notoriously what Blackbeard is weak against, I think will definitely help the deck a lot. I think that Blackbeard as a deck feels almost complete, where it has most, if not all, of the tools that it wants. For the late game, it has KO tools in the Van Augur with this new 7-cost Teach. It has the late game with the 10-cost Teach. And then now with the Shiryu, maybe it has a bit of early game too. So it feels like this almost completes what Blackbeard wants to do. I think it's a very good card, but I'm saying that as someone who's not a major Teach player.
Think it should depend on the meta because I think in the current like removal focus builds, the importance of forests themselves falls off like off a cliff basically. But in a meta like OP10 that we had, like the 4-costs, there was 8 4-costs in every deck pretty much, and in a meta where like it's more about hitting the opponent and setting up small blockers, this probably sneaks in just because of how powerful the raw effect is. It's like basically Lucky Roo, but better. So I can imagine it like being played in such a meta. In the current removal heavy builds, like maybe one or two, because even in like a meta like this, just having an option to get off of Kuzan in late game that like potentially deals with 2 attacks at once is it's just good. But yeah, it's like a big asterisk that maybe depends and so on.
It just depends on what the format looks like, but I'm excited to see how things shape up in the next couple, or when that set comes out. We can jump into the next color, which I'm personally honestly the most excited for in PRB, which is purple. I think a lot of the cards here are like very interesting to the deck build around, but we'll kind of talk about them one at a time. The first one I want to talk about is the SR, which is the Charlotte Pudding. It's 7-cost 5K power Big Mom Pirate with 1K counter. On play, Dawn -2. If your leader has the Big Mom Pirates type and your opponent has 6 or more Dawn on the field, draw 2 cards, then play up to 1 Big Mom Pirate type character with a power from 6,000 to 8,000 from your hand. When I read this card, I just think of a 7-cost way to draw some cards and put an 8-cost category. But I think that's just like so powerful in of itself, especially in decks like Katakuri, Pudding, and I just really want to kind of explore that angle. Do you think that this card is enough power to make those decks viable compared to decks like Blue Purple? Or do you think this is kind of just a little bit of extra power bump that's not really worth it to play these new Big Mom leaders? What are your thoughts on it, Kai?
This card seems pretty crazy to me. Just being able to cheat out, for the most part, 8-cost Katakuri 1 turn early is very significant because that card is so influential, so powerful, because it gains value over time. But also just being able to draw 2 cards as well mitigates the demerit of cards usually like this, which play another card. So you play the 7-cost Pudding, you draw 2 cards, you play another one. So you are card neutral for that play. But you get to, in a way, cycle your hand. You get rid of one of the 8-cost 8,000s from your hand with no counter. Look for more cards the next couple of turns, but you do have to -2 Dong. So that is one thing, is that you can't easily ramp into 10 Dong the next turn, which is what you'd ideally want to in something like the purple Katakuri deck. This isn't color restricted, right? You can pull any Big Mom Pirate.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
So
think so,
like
yeah.
yellow category. That's like the other main one. That's like really interesting. You can also just put in the ramp category if you just want to ramp back as well, just to get the card draw.
Yeah.
The 6-cost 7K.
You could also put in the 7-cost 8,000 Big Mom, but it is a 7-cost, so maybe the argument is to just play that one instead of minusing 2 Dong. But I think that the card has a lot of interesting things. I do think that it's mainly just going to be how many times can you put out the 8-cost Katakuri, whether it's through the 2-cost Katakuri being able to cheat 6 Dong, or through the 7-cost Pudding being able to cheat 1 Dong, but gain a lot of cards back. I think that purple Katakuri as a deck has had an almost decent spot on the meta. It has a decent blue purple Luffy matchup, but the other matchups it does tend to struggle in a little bit. So just finding its niche as the deck that can play a ton of 8-cost Cataclysms and just really wall up very early, I think could be quite powerful for the deck. But it is tricky to say if it's going to actually be enough. In my opinion, I think that it's going to make the deck, at the very least, like low B tier. I think that's pretty inoffensive. But I think that right now, Katakuri, at least in OP12, is almost non-existent. But with this card, I do think that it will probably be much more playable.
Are both parts of the effects tied to the opponent's down condition, or is it just the draw too? Because that does affect my opinion a little bit, and I'm not sure. If you can still play the card without drawing, then it kind of does a lot to improve Pudding's going second curve, where you kind of, when you're on 4 attack ramp and you go to 7, you don't really do anything with the extra dawn. And if you could play out the Katakuri there already, and by this I mean purple Katakuri, because I think he's like the only really impactful target that you can bring out, then this becomes quite powerful. But as it stands, you pretty much have to play this on curve, except for the matchups which ran themselves. And at curve, she's really expensive unless you already hit 10 on, at which point you're kind of going through some hoops to draw extra cards and have a 5k body. And I think that's forgivable, mainly because she does have a counter, so you're not really being taxed on the deck building side, you're not really losing much from your hand. And yeah, the purple decks which minus one, they can play around the ability permanently then.
I could actually end up being wrong on how this works. We don't have the cards yet, so we don't have the official Q&A. I feel like generally the way that these work, you do need to go through the text in order for it to actually activate. So that's how I'd imagine it works. But the way that it is worded in the Japanese thing, there is a separation in the sentence where there's a full stop after the 2 drawn and then the playing character. So I may end up being wrong on this. Sorry if I am. But yeah, that's why I was mainly looking at this card as a purple Katakuri card, because purple Katakuri, although he does minus his Dong and re-ramp his Dong through his leader effect and things like the 5-cost Spittle, he generally plays on curve. So I feel like this sort of card would work better in purple Katakuri. But yeah, if it does end up working the way that we hope it works, then maybe it would also be decent in purple yellow Pudding as well, being able to cheat it out in a way kind of 2 turns earlier.
Terrifying if your opponent has an 8-cost Katakuri, just like when you get to their 6-down turn.
There's a deck that does that already. Like, it's a good deck, I heard.
Speaking of that deck we should not name, but it's just blue purple. I think the other purple card is actually like a very reasonable card for that deck. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to make the cut, but I think it's very reasonable, and it's the 5-cost Doflamingo. It's a 5-cost 6k power Don Quixote and 7 Warlords with 1k counter. It's simple text, but I think it's very effective. It's just a blocker that says on play, if your leader is multicolored, add a Don from your Don deck is rested. It felt like when I was playing blue purple, sometimes I had to make really annoying choices between just like playing a blocker or just choosing to ramp a lot of the time, especially when I was playing the Dofi version. And I felt like having a very clean, proactive threat to play that ramped very cleanly into a Katakuri might just help make blue purple a much more like defensively tooled deck. I mean, obviously it's not a straw hat, which definitely weakens the power of your leader effect when you start playing too many of them. But I thought that this card might end up making the cut. Hrvoje, what are your thoughts on this new 5-cost Doflamingo? Is it good enough for blue purple, or are cards like God Thread just so much better?
I think it's good enough. It's not the main, like, it's not why I'm kind of excited about the card, though, mainly because I figure by the time this comes out, maybe a little after, they will maybe address blue-purple in some manner, so it's, like, going to be less relevant, but it does, like, very smoothly cover the transition, like, into the late stage of the game. Yeah, I don't know, like, God Thread is so valuable in pretty much every matchup that is a bad matchup, like, you need to see God Thread into Betty, you want to see it into Green Purple, into Zora. But this card like naturally just makes the progression of 5-cost into 8-cost very natural, and that benefits pretty much all of the leaders tied to the Don Quixote family, because there's a lot of 8-cost Don Quixote family characters to begin with. Like in Green Purple Doffy, you unlock like either the 8-cost Doffy into some 5-cost, might be another copy of this. So you unlock either that play, either the Rosinante, and in the yellow-purple Rosinante, you can directly go into the Rush Doffy from OP12. Like, I don't know, I think this card is going to be a lot more useful in those other leaders, which are weaker. But yeah, blue-purple is like, it's similar to what I said about BY and the other two brothers. Like, blue-purple is like this power level and these other decks are here. And those might go up like this because of this card, and this might go up like this, but it's still better for blue-purple. But I think the card is pretty good. It will see play somewhere for sure. If not blue-purple, then in the other leaders I named.
I think it's pretty significant buff for blue purple Luffy. Whether or not it takes the God Thread spot might be tricky to say, but I do think that it could potentially. Oh, this does end up coming down to meta a little bit. Maybe takes the Thunder Bagua spot, as people are generally playing both currently. God Thread definitely has utility in being able to get rid of one of the opponent's characters, but there are a lot of the times, for example, Green Zoro sometimes just doesn't play a valuable character onto the board. Green Purple Luffy can increase the cost of their characters, making it very hard to use God Thread, but sometimes you still feel forced to because either it's the only ramp in your hand or it's the only ramp that doesn't have counter in your hand, so you feel like you want to really mitigate that disadvantage. And this card not only having counter, but is always going to work generically and is going to be a blocker on the board, even in cases where you don't necessarily need the ramp, like in the late game where you just want a blocker. I think that it's just a very flexible card, very good card. I think that it fits into Blue Purple Luffy quite well, just to increase consistency, and that's a scary thing for Blue Purple Luffy to have in the early game. So I definitely want to put this into my deck. But there is one thing that I kind of want to maybe ask you guys. Maybe you've tested a little bit more. There was a couple of weeks ago a version of Blue Purple Luffy that won that was focused around the Don Quixote pirates. And I personally generally dislike that version of the deck just because the 8-cost Harakiri into the 5-cost Roshinante doesn't necessarily affect the board in any way. It just draws you cards and restands a bunch of dongs so you could play very defensively. And also, you needed to have specifically that combo because there was no other good 5-cost Don Quixote pirate. And now we have one. This can be played in the early game to help you ramp, and it can also be played off of the 8-cost Katagiri to not only just help you get back to 8 dong to mitigate the option the opponent may have to just not hit you to let you get your leader effect the next turn, but of course is still a blocker. So do you think that maybe this is a significant enough buff to that version to maybe choose to play it over the standard version of Blue Purple Luffy, or is that wishful thinking, Jonas? Maybe because you're a Blue Purple Luffy player.
Yeah, I think that this card does help that version of the deck, but I think that version, the Dofi version of Blue Purple, can only really exist in very specific metas where like the hyper aggro decks aren't nearly as popular. The blue purple deck, when it's being the proactive deck, I think the W version is slightly better because like putting in more bodies puts your opponent in much more uncomfortable spots is very, very obnoxious. But I feel like more often than not, blue purple is the deck that just needs to be defensive and just stabilize and just make sure the game lasts a little bit longer. And I feel like playing cards like 8 cost Dofi and then playing a bunch of the more reactionary events or like the weirder like setup cards just isn't going to be nearly as good. So in short, I just don't think the meta is going to get to a point where blue purple wants to be that level of like aggressive and like try to leave up a bunch of Dawn and play around cards like Dead Man's Game. But if that ends up becoming what the format devolves to, I do think it will end up slotting into the meta.
I like how you use the word devolves too, because it is accurate. Yeah, I don't think blue purple should be aiming towards that, and yeah, I also like the Don Quixote family build less. It will probably be played in the deck, but in the normal version, it's just like a generically good purple card.
I have a bit of bias. I do really like the aggressive version of Blue Purple Luffy. So yeah, but I do also think that if you want to go for that, then rush characters are a lot more effective, especially in the mirror, than developing your board slowly through the 8-cost Katakuri into the 5-cost Flamingo or the 5-cost Rocinante.
Let's go over the last purple card that we've briefly mentioned last time, which is the 2-cost Nami. Probably, the third or fourth Nami searcher that we have, but still a very good one. It's a 2-cost rare that's 2k power and Straw Hat Crew that has 1k counter. On play, look at the top 5 for up to 1 Straw Hat 2 crew card other than Nami and add it to your hand, and then add the rest to the bottom in any order. And as trigger, play this card. I don't think that there's any. I think obviously a bunch of purple decks that want to have Straw Hat cores will play this, especially decks that don't really like the 1-cost Maw, mostly because it can't find Giant and other like cheap 1-cost Straw Hat cards. But I do think this card is very, very reasonable. I don't know if there's any synergy. So the reason I'm thinking about this is because like the Zoro Sanji deck that ended up doing well. I'm not sure there's any card that cares about your searcher being a 2-cost in the purple deck to see if this card can get any extra value. So I'm not entirely sure if there's any deck that might use this that wouldn't be able to use Law. But I'm curious on what your guys' thoughts on this card are in specific, Hrvoje.
First of all, you got me thinking and counting the Nami searches in my head. There is 6. This is the 6th one. So, like there's the red 1-cost, the green 1-cost, the green 3-cost, the blue 1-cost, and the green 2-cost, and now this. So 6 of them. But I actually think that there is a card that could care about this being purple. If you ever run like, I guess it has to be green purple because there's a green shambles card from, I'm not sure if it's like locked or something, but you can play up to 2-cost from your hand, I think, and you bring back anything. So maybe you could swap out a green for a purple Nami in a green purple deck. But no, I think this card is just like a generic add to most of the purple decks running Straw Hats, just because it doesn't have the cost restriction that the 1-cost Law has. It has the trigger and it still has the counter. And 1-cost to 2-cost difference, you don't feel it as much these days, especially in metas where leaders are 6k. The one thing I do think about this card is people are way too happy to assume they will just replace all copies of like when you're at sea with this. I think that you're probably just running 4 of this and then still adding some more copies of when you're at sea, because consistency is good regardless of which variant of the deck you play.
I love when my top tier deck has 5 of the same searcher. Yeah, I just looked up Shambles though. Unfortunately, your leader does need to be supernova to use it, so you don't have access to that synergy. But
I
if we
tried.
do get a green purple Straw Hat supernova leader, which on paper sounds very scary, but someday would be an interesting thing to consider. This is, I would think, at least a pretty significant upgrade to the green purple Luffy deck. But for other decks that don't really easily leave up to them, it may be a bit tricky to run this over something like the 1-cost Law. Yes, it searches 5, yes, it can search Giant, but in a deck like Purple Black Luffy, maybe you just prefer to have the 1-cost just to make sure that you can play it on your first turn going first. So there is a bit of a give and take for this card and the Law, but the fact that you have that choice is something I'm not going to really divulge into too much.
I was trying to count all the searchers in green, purple, and it gets kind of absurd. All right, that's a future problem. Let's not worry too much about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the next color. This is blue, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Let's talk about the SR for blue, which is the new 4-cost Marco. It's a blue 4-cost 6K power Wano and form Whitebeard pirate. It's just a blocker that says on KO, draw 2 cards. I feel like if this card was printed in OP03, OP04, this card would have been one of the most broken cards to ever exist. I don't know if a 4/6 blocker that on KO draws 2 card is just that good anymore, which I think is a ridiculous thought process to have, but I'm just not sold this kind of has any home where it'd be spectacular, at least right now, at least. What are your thoughts on this card, Kai?
Okay, so I'm of the opinion that this is actually a very significant card to blue. Um, Mostly the fact that a lot of generic like, blue as a color doesn't have very many powerful cards, especially in the, early mid game. So, what a lot of blue decks recently have been doing is just putting in the 4-cost Cavendish as just a generic 4-cost 6,000 body that can draw 2, trash 1. And that card, if it stays on the board for multiple turns, it gains more value than this card. But this card has the same stat line, same amount of counter in having 0 counter, but also is a blocker and on KO draws you 2 cards, I think is almost a strict upgrade over the Cavendish for most cases. And the fact that people are running that Cavendish means to me that people are probably just going to replace the Cavendish with this card for the most part. I think that also it being Whitebeard Pirates, although it's former Whitebeard Pirates, I do need to check if it is actually searchable off of the 1-cost easel. I would imagine that it is, though. And also being Wano means that it's very generically usable in a lot of these decks that can search them, whether it's blue yellow Nami through the 1-cost Yamato, whether it's these blue decks through the 1-cost easel. And in general, I think that it's just a solid buff to blue. So I think that a lot of decks that don't really have an identity, or especially an early game identity like Blue Doflamingo had previously, would definitely want to use this card. Also, potentially blue Nami buffs, not just blue yellow Nami.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, Blue Nami, she kind of has a fake pilaf in this, in a sense that you get the pilaf effect and the 1-cost blocker if you, like, tie those two together. But, and that's obviously, like, just card efficiency. But for Blue Yellow Nami, I was thinking, like, she does already run some 4/6 guys, like Cavendish and Weevil, just to have that body efficiency on a 6K body where you just need to be aggressive in some matchups. But then this can flip the switch at any time and just become a blocker, and you cash in the 2 cards. Honestly, I wouldn't have been too surprised if this, like, ever saw a play in Dofi, just because technically you can afford some non-7 Warlord 3-cost, 4-cost, 5-cost if they're good, but for the most part they're not good, so you just don't have anything to put in those slots. But 4/6 is a very efficient and a very aggressive stat line, so the card itself, I don't know, it just impresses me by design. I would expect to see some of it in, as Kai very eloquently put it, like decks that don't have an identity, because that kind of is what defines Blue these days. Though I will say, I really like this trend where Marco just gets super rares where the art is like 10 times better than the alt art. And they got the guy called Niji Mark to do the base art. So
You guys might end up being right on it in terms of it being just a good card in decks that don't have a home. I'm just skeptical of blue decks that don't really have great identities at the moment, but if it finds a home, I will just eat my words very quickly.
The WoW version of Blue Yellow Nami just keeps getting buffs, so happy about that.
That might be a game changer. I mean, I think about
Yeah.
that some more. Though the Yamato searcher is like unironically getting quite good.
This card's searchable off of the yellow Yamato as well as the blue 1-cost easel, and the 7-cost Olden is also searchable off of both. So you could potentially find a version of Blue Yellow Nami, for example, that runs both searchers and just hyper searches your 7-cost Olden out and finds this card. One issue that I did have with the 1.0 version when I was testing it was that a lot of the cards that you were looking for have no counter, and this does kind of add to that. So something that you need to kind of consider, but I think that there's a lot of potential for a card like this because the effect's generically good and it's very searchable in a lot of these decks.
There's too many decks to build. This is the worst.
yeah,
But yeah, Let's jump into the other band replacement card they have in PRB02 in Jinbei. This is a blue character that's a rare at the 4-cost 5k power. Has a Fishman and 7 Warlords. On play, look at the top 5 cards of your deck and reveal up to 1 7 Warlord other than Jinbei, and then add it to your hand. And then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. And when attacking, put 1 character with a cost of 1 or less in the bottom of their owner's deck. So instead of putting 2 characters in play, this guy will function as a +1 in terms of card advantage. Is this a good enough tool to make Dofi reasonable again? Once Dofi got banned in NA, it still ended up having some decent success, but kind of has fell by the wayside since GP Luffy got printed. Do you think the deck needs another 5k body that +1s, or is this like not really spectacular in the current meta?
Wait, am I supposed to be more qualified to answer like a Doffy question than you?
Oh yeah,
I don't think I am, Jonas. I want to hear what you think.
Alright.
Yeah, you can certainly say that.
I guess I'll jump on this one first. I'm not a fan personally, just because I think that there are already a lot of +1s in blue. In terms of like card advantage, there's like the starter deck, like I think it's Croc that can draw cards a lot of the time. And it already has Weevil laws or like inherently card advantage. So I think having an extra 5k body that's a +1 isn't going to be doing enough. And I didn't think that the one attacking effect was relevant enough either in the current meta. So like there's not really like 1-drops, with the exception of like green yellow law that you're gonna get some real value against. So ultimately I think it's just a very mediocre body that just like draws an extra card and finds you some of your more important cards like Teach or like Boas on curve. But I just don't think that's good enough in the current meta, where the 2 main decks of GP and blue purple are just 6k leaders that can kind of invalidate the swarm of 5k bodies.
Yeah, I do think the when attacking effect is specifically designed for the leader Hancock, just to be able to get that draw, being able to bottom your characters, the opponent's characters if they have them, and just get that +1 in hand is going to be nice for Hancock. But what Hancock really needs is a way to spread her board, which was taken from her. I do think that just with the current meta now, with Green Purple Luffy and Blue Purple Luffy both being 6k leaders essentially, that a 5k body just doesn't really cut it for Blue Doflamingo. So would have been nicer to see a card like this as a 6k body. The searcher's nice, but the weird thing with Blue Doflamingo is I don't really know what you really want to be searching aside from something like Jinbei, which the old Jinbei, and this Jinbei can't find banned cards.
No, this will, yeah, pretty much I think always add a 2k or just bot each, whatever is like missing on the spot. So yeah, when I saw the when attacking effect, I had 2 thoughts. First is Boa, because it kind of naturally slots in there on turns where Boa doesn't have a good bounce. You just search whatever you hope to find. But then the other, much more exciting, is what makes me label this card as, potential TM. Like, it could be insane, probably won't be though. But in theory, this could search Moria, the old one which is banned and might not even be playable in any Eternal format, but also the new one. So if you ever get like a blue-black combination, probably needs to be Thriller Bark. Removal effects are pretty good combined with black just because of the power of cost reduction. And then this gets like a insane mileage out of just being played because of the threat it presents. So that's like the image I have in my mind where I think this card could end up really good. Like, has to be Thriller Bark blue black, and then this card like gets a home in these blue black combinations if the leaders themselves are sufficient. Other than that, yeah, I don't see it really bringing Doffy back just because of it effectively being a worse 4-cost Moria. It might make it at a few copies, but I wouldn't think it puts Doffy back on the map.
I thought of a way that we could maybe fix this card. So after the search, instead of placing them all to the bottom, if you could choose to put it on top instead, then I think this card could have actually been pretty cool.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it would differentiate a little bit from the ST Moria that we were just talking about. But yeah, unfortunately, that's not the card that we got though.
Okay, let's talk about the last blue card that we brought up before in the Mr. 3, the Galdino blocker. As a refresher, it's a 2-cost 1k power that's special. It's both cross-skilled and former broke works in the 1k counter. It has an effect that can be activated when this character is rested by its opponent's effect, and you can trash this character. And if you do so, you get to draw 2 cards, and it's just a cheap blocker. we briefly mentioned that this card might just be a good card to just stabilize it and like late game with Buggy. Has this card like risen or fallen anyone's expectations? I've kind of forgotten about this card. It kind of felt a little bit too replaceable before, but I'm curious if anyone has like stronger opinions about this card after a couple more weeks of thinking about it. What are your thoughts on this, Kai?
I was a big fan of this card when we first looked at it, if you would remember. Just because we having any generically powerful 2-cost blocker is very nice. But looking at it more, green's not as relevant as we maybe thought it might be. So you have to really look at the decks that just already want to be playing a 2-cost blocker, and the answer is that there aren't really any. Most of the blue decks that want to play low-cost blockers just play something like the 1-cost Law instead. And if you want something that's slightly bigger than the 1-cost Law, then now have the 4-cost Marco. So it feels like it could be very powerful in specific metas, but those metas are going to be very, very specific, and you're going to be sacrificing some significant deck space to be able to use this card. So it's still a strong card, I think, but is going to pick its places a bit more.
Yeah, my opinion increased very slightly, but it also started out much lower, I believe, than Kai's, mainly because I've been playing Buggy, and those games where your opponent just completely ignores your board and slams face, especially with blue-purple Luffy. And when that works, it's very frustrating because at some point okay, they're just gonna Uzo Hachi me 2 or 3 turns in a row and swing like 11 or whatever. And this maybe helps or completely fixes those game states where your early game was just too slow. But yeah, other than that, didn't really think about the card at all. But I did recall it existing in those moments where I'm like getting Uzo Hachi. Like, okay, great work.
Yeah, I do think the card can have some moments where it's like very good against Usohachi specifically. My main qualm with this card, now that I've thought about it a little bit more, is the consolation prize of drawing 2 cards when your opponent's trying to go for a game feels a little futile. It's not the worst. I think it's also still quite good, but I just don't think that that's a salvageable situation. I'd much rather just play counter events or just play blockers that are a little bit more harder to interact with. But yeah, let's talk about the second to last color in green. Let's first talk about the SR. We've talked about it before within the context of maybe like green yellow law, but the new Monkey D. Luffy is a 4-cost 5k power. Has both a supernova and a straw hat, great typing, but there's also a 1k counter. It says, on your turn on play, if your leader is multicolored and your opponent has 7 or fewer Dawn cards on the field, at the start of your opponent's main phase, your opponent rests 1 of their active Dawn cards. Does this card still seem like a very powerful card that might see play in a lot of like aggro green decks? This card seems pretty good in like Zoro in my head, and also seems quite good in
Zoro
like
is not multicolor.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So is it just like green yellow law and like I guess red green law?
Green purple Luffy
Green, purple
slamming
Luffy.
4 copies
Oh
insta.
yeah,
like,
sorry, I forgot about green purple. That's not a green deck
not
in
sure
my
4
head.
copies, but like insta.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the green purple Luffy player. I just a little bit of input. I think that I was thinking about this card a bit more. I do think it's better than I initially thought. It is maybe a sort of card that you put in at like 3 copies. Nice to have in the early game. You don't really want to see it too much in the late game because it does have the Dong condition, unlike something like the 5-cost Bonnie. But being able to play this on 4 Dong to deny the opponent's 5 Dong turn, 5 Dong is very significant in this card game. It means that you can't God Threat. It means that you can't, if you're playing, I guess just on the topic of Green Yellow Law, you can't play your Cavendish immediately. There's a lot of strong 5 costs that people really want to play on curve, which is why a lot of people take first. So just being able to deny that is very solid, but I do want to hear your opinions as the green purple Luffy man. Also, guide on Metafy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I always forget to shout that out, but you can see my guide for green purple Luffy on Metafy. Very in depth and going to be updated for OP12 soon. But yeah, and for PRB02 when this guy comes out, and I really do think this is a great card because there's so much 5-cost focus in the current meta, but even just not taking 5 costs into account, because not every deck plays for 5 costs, there are Sanji Pudding, Smoker, Godthread, whatever. This works up until the 9 Dawn turn, effectively, because as long as your opponent has 7 Dawn, that means they're going to get that 2 Dawn after, but you can potentially lock their 7, 8, 9 Dawn power play, whichever their deck prefers the most. So this can deny Katakuri from Blue Purple Luffy going into 8 Dawn, or a Lin going into 9 Dawn. Like, these are all massive tempo gains, which you gain for basically free, and the only deck I think can even like attempt to kind of bypass it is Red Green Smoker, because with the Navy Kujaku Searcher, they can do like Kujaku 1, Sanji 3, and then on 5, if you lock rest one of the Dawn, they can Kujaku on the Sanji, lead the extended Dawn, and then they can play the Smoker. But then they didn't play the second the second trick was like the Shigi or something. And even then, I think the Smokers are cutting Kujakus because of the new Perona Searcher in OP12. So it just like creates opportunities where opponent doesn't really get the counterplay they would want. And it's not just the 5 down turns, because once again, if you're going first into Smoker and you play this on 5, they cannot like Smoker plus 4 cost, or even better, I guess, in the mirror. When you don't have Sanji Pudding, like this creates so many backup play options, and it's a very cheap inclusion being a 1K. So this is the card I'm really hyped about.
It's a terrifying card to play against. It's like Kai mentioned, like stopping 5 drops is just so annoying. But it's not really limited to that. Like Hrvoje mentioned, there's just so many awkward turns that you can help facilitate with this. And now people can't just like play towards like jamming their 7-8 drop that they really want to. And you get to really disrupt a lot of people's draws because of it. And they can sometimes just be game winning on the spot.
Yeah, like even 7 cost Kid, 7 cost 7 cost Law, 8 cost Kid, Lufitaro, like sky's the limit. Like there's always, even if they don't play for specifically 4 or 5 or 6 Dawn, they might have 7 or 8 Dawn turn, which is like very telegraphed, and you get to disrupt it.
Let's hope that doesn't happen to me anytime soon. That doesn't seem particularly fun.
Yeah, I might need to hop over to Green Purple Luffy if Blue Purple Luffy takes some hits in the next coming month. So it'll be well, let's see if first of all this deck doesn't get hit as well. But this card with alongside the new Nami, alongside all of the OP12 buffs that we've got into, just makes the deck stronger and stronger.
Feels good to be a Straw Hat these days.
Yeah,
Wasn't always like that.
Yeah, I do kind of have a question though. Is I feel like the space in the Green Purple Luffy deck is pretty tight though. Do you think you really have the space to like find space for all of these new
We'll
cards?
find space. Like, but if the card is good enough, the space
Oh,
will,
yeah.
will be made. Like that's how it works.
Because you have those decks sometimes that are like 46 cards for core, and you suddenly have like 2 new cards you want to put in. You have to like really figure out where you're going to cut away at. Means you're losing power in some places to gain power in some other places. But
Most of
Green
the
Purple
1Ks
Luffy,
are very flexible.
Is it crazy to
Fine
trim on Zorojuro?
oh,
Because I was like,
I would sooner trim Giant than Zorojuro, I think.
even with having like now 2 new cards that you can't search with it between Dead Man's Game and this card.
Actually, that's a
Is
good
it-
question. But
Eh.
the thing is, when cards like this, like when decks get significant power ups, it is worth considering, sacrilegious deck building, where you cut the things that people don't think are cuttable, and you just try them, because it might improve the deck for the better. So maybe Zorojuro does get the axe partially. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also hesitant, but just food for thought.
Well, there's the factor as well that Luffy can't play, or he can only play purple Straw Hats, so cutting that card
Yeah.
may be a little bit scary if you do still run that, which in this meta, at least in Japan, you still do. So I'll leave that to you. I'll be eagerly waiting on your Metafire updates.
If you could Luffy Taro into this card, it'd be so miserable.
You can play the Film Luffy into this card, but you cannot play Film Luffy into Sanji Pudding.
Compared to the new Luffy, I don't think this card is like as absurd, but I think this card is actually quite reasonable. And it's the new 4-cost Zoro. It's a 4-cost 4K power that's both Supernova and Straw Hat again. It's a 2K counter. It's a blocker that says on your opponent's turn, if this character would be rested by opponent's effects, you may instead rest one of your other characters. I think this is a much better restriction on a blocker that you want to kind of have for the later part of the game compared to Galdino. I just think it's better as an extra 2K in these like green Zoro decks than the ones that people are currently playing, like the current 4-cost 4K. I forget what he does, but it's also pretty mundane, like rest 2 drops or something.
Yeah, it KOs a rested 2 cost on the board. It's like basically nothing.
Yeah. So I think this card is a little bit better than that, and I probably will make place or have a good spot in Green Zoro. Do you think this card has any other homes where this is good? Do you think this card's like objectively powerful enough to put in other green Straw Hat decks, or is it kind of more just fine? What are your thoughts on it, Kai?
I think that the card's going to be used because it's extremely searchable. It's Straw Hat, Supernova, and Slash, so it hits like all of the marks that you want for green. But the effect, just 4 cost, is very, very expensive for just a generic blocker, and you don't really have the tools in green to really cheat it out like you would in some other colors. So I do think it would just be, for the most part, a 2K like the current promo Zoro is that Green Zoro is running. Thankfully means that you don't actually need to buy that Zoro for however expensive it may be in the West. You could just wait for this card to come out.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what you guys already said. Like the 2K with a lot of searchable like crossovers is the nice part. You know, Straw Hat, Supernova, and yeah, the Slash also matters now. But as Yonas said, like it's a very expensive investment, and it also requires an active body besides it, which means like a leftover searcher or a newly played searcher. And yeah, that's just kind of expensive for a blocker. But it probably does come up in a pinch, like better than other stuff would. So yeah, it'll see some play for sure. If for nothing, for the lack of good green 2K options, because honestly, green is probably the most liking color in the 2K department.
We got Tashigi, and that's
Yeah,
about
that's
it
it.
for a while.
But I mean, Tashigi's crazy though, so like
Tashigi is crazy.
you can't complain too much.
Speaking of 3 costs, let's talk about the last green card that we briefly talked about last time. In Jewelry Bonnie, 3 cost, 3K blocker. Sorry, it's Supernova and Bonnie Pirate with 1K counter. It's a 3K blocker that says on opponent's attack once per turn, so up to one of your Dawn cards is active. We briefly mentioned about how this is like a pretty good way to play around Hody, and that's kind of one of its main upgrades compared to a card like Blocker Rosinante from a couple sets back. Or sorry, Blocker Bartolomeo. But I'm not sure if you guys have any other thoughts about this card that have changed since recently. What are your thoughts on this card, Hrvoje?
Yeah, I remember you guys opening my eyes to this being playable off of 8 cost Kid, and with like presumed prevalence of Deadman's Game in OP12. I guess she does get like solid potential to just be playable. I don't know. I'm never too hyped about small blockers, especially ones that are like decently easily removable, but for sure better than the previous alternatives. And that gradual improvement is what what allows decks to catch up.
My opinion on the card hasn't changed too much. I still think it's going to be like a solid Bonnie card. But one card that maybe has changed my opinion about a little bit in other decks is a card that's not out yet, so maybe a little bit early to start talking about, is Red Green Luffy. Red Green Luffy OP13 card, which I'll just kind of like briefly. I don't have the official translation on my screen right now, but to briefly explain for the people who haven't heard of this card, it's a new OP13 card, not the OP011. One Dong on your leader when the opponent's attacking. If you have 5 or less active Dong, you can rest one of your Dong cards and gain plus 1,000 power to your leader or a Straw Hat type character, or plus 2,000 power. Sorry, to your leader or a Straw Hat type character for the battle. So, just having things like 3 cost Bonnie that can increase the number of Dong that you have active at the end of the turn could be solid for that sort of deck. I do worry though that maybe it's just going to end up being like you're playing Bonnie but not Bonnie, so I'm not sure exactly what would be the difference maker between those two decks, but still a couple of decks that can use this card now.
I haven't experimented with the OP13 leader that much, but that leader effect seems very terrifying, so I kind of want to mess around with it myself.
Yeah, converting Dawn into cards at the 1-for-1 rate, you know, feels like those really good deals in like the resource-based board games.
Not to get into that later too much, but you can't save your 8 cost kid, which is a very smart balanced decision. But so there will be some difference between Bonnie and this Red Green Luffy leader, but very excited for both of them with this new Bonnie card.
That's kind of sad, but also very understandable. So
Yeah.
let's jump into the last color, red, which has a couple interesting cards, which should be pretty reasonable. The first one is the SR, which is the Trafalgar Law. This is a 6-cost 7k power slash character that has Punk Hazard, 7 Warlords of the Sea, and Heart Pirates. It has a 1k counter and says once per turn, if this character be removed from the field by your opponent's effect, you may give this character minus 2k power during this turn instead, so like the starter deck ace. The other effect says when attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2k power during this turn. So there have been a couple cards that have like on attack reduced power of characters, but they've never really seen that much play, mostly just because of the cost of setup and like how prone they are to removal, especially when like Lucio is being super prevalent. I'm curious if having this protection clause will make this kind of mid-range red card good enough to play, whether it's a deck like Shanks or some other like kind of mid-range slash slower red deck will have a tool for or have a space for this card. I'm also excited that this is a Punk Hazard, so you can search this off Virgo in Red Queen Smoker. But I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are about this law, whether it's good enough to keep up with the rest of the metagame. What are your thoughts on this card, Kai?
This is a Caesar Clown buff.
Oh,
Yeah.
forgot about the clown. No.
So you minus 2,000 power, and then you bounce back, presumably a different Punk Hazard card, and then you can KO 4,000 power or less. So with this card, you can consistently KO 6,000 powers or less, which is one of the issues the deck had because you had to rely on Monet. But now with this card and Monet together, you can KO 8,000 power or less. So very good in Caesar Clown. That's the only deck that I can see this being like a staple in, and the others, it may be tricky to justify because it's kind of generically good, but maybe red's maybe weak enough as a color that you can justify playing generically good cards, but the game as a whole, you need like very active, aggressive, proactive effects to actually justify being used.
I didn't even consider Caesar Clown, but that makes a lot of sense. I was just thinking Smoker because he's double searchable like Punk Hazard Slash, but I'm not sure if he makes any lasting impact there. Like he's mainly carried by the fact that he has a 1k character, which makes him a cheap inclusion. But also that ace protection effect to go minus 2k is a lot better when your stat line is 7k base, because now you're 5k and not 4k, so it can actually be defended if you need to defend it. And I guess, yeah, if Red Purple wasn't banned, the deck would maybe want this source of repeatable and unremovable minus power, because it would like hit 2 birds with 1 stone, where you just Black does not remove this guy, and then he also reduces power, and then you leader ability. But that's like what could have been. I'm trying to think of other examples, but really nothing. Maybe Marco, but how much power reduction does Marco need?
Yeah, it's still probably like a solid inclusion for Marco, just being a 1k counter and being able to be played on the 3 long turn going second, or the third turn going second. So not bad there either, for sure. But yeah.
It's a fine card, but yeah, I just don't think red as it is right now probably can use this card exceptionally well. Let's jump into the next card, which is Kobe. This is a fun card that might have a home, but I'm not entirely sure if it's going to have a great spot. But it's a good card. 4-cost 5k strike that's both navy and sword, and has 1k counter. On your opponent's turn, if your leader is Navy type, this character gets plus 1k, so it's a 6k on your opponent's turn. And it says, when attacking, KO an opponent's character with an original power of 3k or less. Then if you have 6 or less cards in your hand, draw 1 card. I'm excited for this card within the context of Kobe specifically, because you don't have to wait to use this character's effect, because of it being a sword character, it can kind of attack your opponent's character as the turn is being played. And getting that extra card advantage is actually quite useful. What are your guys' thoughts on this card? Do you think it has a home outside of Kobe? And does this card make Kobe go up to like a B tier deck?
I don't think this solves any of like Kobe's real issues. I do like the card, but the fact that it can only KO original 3k power or less means it is only dealing with like those searchers and generally weenies, maybe blockers. But like Kobe, I don't think is currently that poorly positioned into decks relying on small bodies for aggro. The problem is like all the stuff that spams big bodies that he cannot remove by combat because of how unreliable the combat-based removal is. So yeah, the fact that he's locked to original power is what really holds this card back, but what makes it good is that it will recoup card advantage. Like it's harder to hit than the Kobe leader, and it's effectively like a mini Cavendish. You don't get the filter, but you do get the card advantage.
Basically feel the same way. Maybe you can justify using this in Smoker since it would be 7k on the opponent's turn, but KOing a base 3k or less generally is just going to be those small blockers. Colby is not really a deck that's really struggled with dealing with the smaller bodies on the opponent's board. They've more struggled with dealing with the opponent's larger bodies. This kind of attacks the wrong issues that Colby has. But still, I mean, I guess one of the other issues that Kobe has had is the lack of resources that he has. So it's not a bad card, but I don't really see it increasing Kobe's ranking throughout the actual metagame.
Kind of in the same boat, but hopefully this card ends up proving me wrong because I really want to make Kobe work, to be honest. And then lastly, another card we've talked about, the 4-cost Lucky Roo. That's a 4-cost 2k power that's Red Hair Pirates. 1k counter that's a blocker that says on play, you may trash one character card with 6k power or more from your hand to draw 2 cards. We've talked a little bit about how this might slot pretty decently into Shanks just because the concentration of just like big bricks that are just like non-counters is pretty high in that deck, and having the flexibility to discard those to draw 2 cards will be nice. But I'm not entirely sure this card's going to be amazing in that deck either, so I'm not entirely sure if anyone's thoughts on this card have changed, but I'm curious to see what you guys' perspectives are. What are your thoughts on it, Kai?
Unchanged. I still think it's probably a decent Shanks card. It does compete with some of the other solid forecasts the deck already has, but it does allow you to play a bit more flexible top end, put in something like the 9-cost Shanks for certain metas, be able to trash it when you don't need it for certain matchups. I think it's generally a pretty solid card for the color. Like I said last time, so I don't really go into that too much, but I mean, it's not bad to me, but not enough to bring Shanks into the meta, I would think.
Yeah, it doesn't solve the tempo issues. It just mildly solves the brick issues. It's like pretty much the same opinion as the last time. It's okay. If it was in the starter deck would have been slightly more justifiable to buy, but because it is better than all the cards in the starter deck. But that's not saying much because of how terrible all the red support was. Shanks players might play this, they might not because the 4-cost 6k Shanks comes out, the blocker.
I wanted to talk about a conspiracy theory I saw online that was very funny. Some people were talking about how Nine Mom actually wasn't printed in this set, and people are like speculating that there's a chance that is actually getting banned from this hypothetical ban list that might be coming out just because it wasn't printed. I'm not entirely sure if you guys think that has any basis, but I thought it was a really fun thing to speculate about.
I do think there's some base. I may have partaken in said conspiracy theory because it also goes the other way. Like when you saw the giant SP, you kind of assumed it's safe for a while, like at least like 3 to 4 months. Who knows? Like Moria took them a bit longer than that, 7 or 8 months. And also another card that I hated to see was when the pudding got the SP announced. So yeah, she'll be sticking around. So yeah, it could mean that Nyko's Lin is gone, but they did just omit some reprints, like the EBO1 Chopper is not in there, and notably the OPO4 Sabo was not in the first PRB, and he didn't get banned despite being a very powerful card for that time in the meta. So, I'm just saying all the words to say could go either way.
All right. You heard it first here. He's getting banned apparently.
Thank you guys for watching till the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please let us know in the comments what cards or decks that you may be looking out for with the PRB release. I understand that it's going to be a little bit later for the West, but still something that we are definitely going to be looking forward to. The podcast is on Spotify relatively soon. Maybe already is out by the time this podcast comes out. Not exactly sure. But finally got that done. And I hope you guys enjoyed this one. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.